The wind carried the scent of mesquite and dust when Takoda reined in his horse at the ridge. From the high ground, he could see the valley stretched out before him, the very heart of his life, once his sanctuary, now a wound upon the land. Fences carved through the open grass like scars. New corrals leaned crooked in the evening light, slapped together from cedar posts he himself had once cut. Smoke curled from a chimney that wasn't his, a lazy plume that drifted toward the horizon like a taunt. But it wasn't the ranch that made his chest burn like a coal in the fire. It was her dot by the well. Half in shadow stood Eliza, her pale dress torn at the sleeve, her auburn hair pinned back hastily. She bent to draw water, her shoulders squared with the stubbornness of survival, but her head was bowed, as if the fight inside her had been beaten down by years of waiting. Takoda's hand gripped the reins so tightly the leather creaked. She was alive, but she was not free. 3 years had passed since he last saw her. 3 years since soldiers branded him an outlaw, a fugitive for crimes he never committed. They called him a horse thief, a murderer, a renegade. He had been forced into the canyons and badlands, hunted like a wolf. Every day had been a fight to survive. But through the hunger, the hiding, the long winters with only the fire for company, one thought had kept him alive. Eliza would be waiting. He had been wrong. Takoda's eyes shifted to the porch. Clayton Briggs, his former neighbor, leaned lazily against the rail with a glass of whiskey in hand. His boots rested on Takoda's porch beam like he owned the world. His hat was tilted back, revealing a smirk that twisted Takoda's stomach. Briggs was a man who thrived on easy victories, who laughed the loudest when others fell. He had once shaken Takoda's hand in friendship, sworn to keep watch over the ranch when times grew dangerous. Now he had stolen it, along with the woman who had once stood at Takoda's side beneath the cottonwood tree and vowed to love him until death. Takoda's jaw tightened. His people had a word for betrayal, but it was not sharp enough to describe this. Eliza straightened with the water bucket, and for one fleeting second, her gaze swept across the ridge. Takoda froze. Did she see him? Her eyes lingered on the horizon, then fell away, her shoulders drooping slightly, as though the strength to look for him had finally drained from her bones. Apache warrior in him wanted to ride down then and there, to tear Briggs from the porch and reclaim what had been stolen. But Takoda knew better. This was not a fight won by rage. Briggs had more than whiskey and stolen land on his side. He had the law, the town, and men who would follow him with rifles loaded. If Takoda stormed down without a plan, it would be Eliza who paid the price. The sun dipped lower, spilling red across the mountains and turning the ranch into a battlefield of shadows. Takoda sat tall in the saddle, his black hair whipping loose in the wind. He could hear the creak of the barn door, the restless lowing of cattle that should have borne his brand, the faint sound of Briggs laughing low and mocking. Takoda whispered a prayer in Apache, not for himself but for Eliza. She was 30 now, but the years had pressed heavy on her. He could see it in the way she moved, steady but weighed down, like a woman who had learned to survive chains she could not see. And so, beneath the dying light, Takoda began to plan. He would not rush into battle like a fool. No, he would watch. He would wait, and he would strike when the time was right. Briggs thought him dead or broken, a shadow forgotten in the desert. But he had returned, and this time, Takoda carried not just the fire of revenge, but the burden of love and the will to reclaim both his land and his wife. The ranch below lay quiet as the high as the fire of revenge, but the burden of love and the will to reclaim both his land and his wife. The ranch below lay quiet as the fire of revenge, but the fire of Indru. Stars began to prick the sky. But in Takoda's chest, the war drum beat on. The town of Dry Creek lay 3 miles from Takoda's ranch, a cluster of wooden buildings huddled against the vast emptiness of the desert. That night, as the stars stretched endless above him, Takoda guided his horse down the back trails, sticking to the shadows of the cottonwoods. His return could not be announced with gunfire or shouting. It had to begin like a whisper, unseen and unspoken, until the moment came when all would hear it. He dismounted behind the livery stable, tethering his horse where the lantern light didn't reach. The streets of Dry Creek were quiet, but not asleep. A poker game spilled laughter from the saloon, the piano hammering out a broken tune. The sheriff's office glowed faintly, though no one stood on the boardwalk outside. Takoda's moccasins touched the dirt without sound as he moved like a shadow toward the heart of town. He needed two things: to know where Briggs stood in the eyes of the townsfolk, and to find a way to reach Eliza without putting her in danger. The first came quicker than he expected. A pair of ranch hands stumbled out of the saloon, one nursing a half-empty bottle. Their words slurred, but the names they spoke cut clear through the night. "Briggs sure thinks he owns this town now," one of them laughed. "Rides Eliza around like she's a prize he won at cards." The other spat into the dirt. "She don't look like no prize. Looks hollow, like her soul's been kicked out. Ain't right what he done. That Apache fella, what was his name? Takoda? He was a better man, outlaw or not." Takoda froze in the shadows, their drunken words piercing him like arrows. Some remembered him kindly. Others swallowed Briggs's lies. But Eliza, how much more hollow could she grow before she broke? He moved on, his heart pounding. Past the saloon, past the shuttered blacksmith, until he reached the small chapel at the edge of town. There, in the flickering lamplight, he found her. Eliza knelt alone on the chapel steps, a shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. Her hair was loose now, falling like a river of copper in the lamplight. She held a folded scrap of paper, her hands trembling as she pressed it to her chest. Takoda remained hidden, watching. He could not reveal himself yet, not with Briggs's spies roaming, not with the sheriff ready to brand him an outlaw the second he appeared. But to be this close and say nothing, it burned him more than the desert sun ever had. Eliza whispered into the night, words so soft only the silence carried them to him. "God, if he's alive, let him come back. Or let me die and be done with it." Takoda's throat tightened. She still prayed for him. She still believed, even through the chains. He stepped forward, instinct driving him, but stopped when the chapel door creaked open. It wasn't Briggs. It was the preacher, an old man with weary eyes. He placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder. "You best get home, child. Ain't safe to be out here alone. Briggs'll be asking where you gone." Her face hardened, but she nodded, tucking the paper into her dress. As she rose, she cast one last look at the horizon. For a heartbeat, Takoda thought her eyes found his shadow. Then she turned and walked back toward the road, her figure swallowed by the night. Takoda leaned against the chapel wall, his chest heaving. He had seen her pain with his own eyes, heard her prayer with his own ears. Briggs had stolen more than land, he had stolen years of her life. But not all was lost. She still carried hope, fragile as it was. The Apache warrior straightened. The plan was no longer just about reclaiming his land. It was about giving Eliza back the strength Briggs had tried to crush. And when the time came, Takoda swore, the man who stole everything from them would pay with more than just blood. The desert gave nothing freely, and Takoda had learned long ago to take only when the time was right. For 2 nights after watching Eliza at the chapel, he lingered in the shadows around his stolen ranch. He studied the movements of Briggs's men, 3 ranch hands who carried rifles like they owned the ground they walked on. He watched when the lanterns went out, when Eliza fetched water, when Briggs staggered drunk from the porch. Every detail carved itself into Takoda's mind, each a piece of the plan forming inside him. On the 3rd night, the moon hung low and bright, silvering the fences and casting long shadows across the fields. Takoda slipped from the cottonwoods and crossed the stream at the back of the property. The cold water bit into his legs, but the sound of it masked his steps. By the time he reached the barn, his heart was hammering like the war drum of his youth. This was no battlefield of open warriors, it was a war of silence, and silence was his weapon. The barn smelled of hay and dust, though it was wrong somehow, foreign. Briggs's cattle shifted restlessly, their hides branded with the crooked B that mocked Takoda's memory. Once, the animals here bore the proud double diamond brand he and Eliza had chosen together. Now the sight of those false marks felt like seeing his own name carved away. Takoda's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and there tucked near the back of the barn was a small lantern, its glow revealing a figure. Eliza. She knelt beside a feed bin, her hair loose, her dress plain. She looked thinner, her face sharper from years of hardship. Yet when she turned her head slightly, the faint line of stubbornness still shaped her jaw. She had not been entirely broken. Takoda's breath caught. He wanted to step forward, to say her name, to take her hand and tell her he had returned. But footsteps crunched outside, and a man's voice rang sharp. "Eliza, you still messin' with that feed? Get back inside." Briggs don't like waiting on his supper. The voice belonged to a ranch hand Lyle, a heavy-set man who carried his cruelty like a badge. Eliza stiffened but did not answer. She set the lantern aside, rose, and brushed straw from her dress. For one split second, as she moved, her eyes flicked to the barn's darker corner. Did she sense him? Did she feel him watching? Takoda held still, every muscle tense. If she saw him, she gave no sign. She slipped out the door, her figure swallowed by the night. When silence returned, Takoda moved forward. He reached for the lantern she had left behind. The flame danced weakly, casting gold light over the barn wall. Without thinking, he pulled a small knife from his belt. Pressing it to the wood, he carved a Mark II diamonds side by side. Their mark. He left it low, hidden behind a stack of hay bales where only Eliza, if she returned, might notice. A message without words. Proof that he was alive. The barn grew darker as he snuffed the lantern and slipped away into the fields. His chest ached with the weight of restraint. To see her and not touch her, to hear her voice yet remain silent, that was a wound deeper than any bullet. But the mark would speak where he could not doubt by dawn. Takoda was back in the hills, hidden among the rocks. He watched as Briggs stumbled out to the porch, shouting orders at his men. He did not notice when Eliza carried water to the barn. Takoda's eyes never left her. He saw the moment her hand brushed the hay, when her fingers stilled. When she leaned close and discovered the carving, her shoulders trembled. She looked around quickly, then pressed her hand flat against the wood. For the first time in years, her lips curved upward the faintest smile, fragile as glass yet real. Takoda closed his eyes, the sight seared into him. She knew. She believed again that it was enough to give him strength for what was coming. Eliza returned to the barn twice the next day, each time under the pretense of tending to feed or checking the cattle. But her hands trembled each time she passed the hay bales, her eyes flicking toward the hidden carving like it was a flame she dared not touch. By nightfall, she could bear it no longer. When the house fell quiet and Briggs's snoring rattled the walls, Eliza slipped from her bed. She pulled on her shawl, clutching it tightly around her shoulders, and made her way through the cold night air to the barn. The door creaked softly as she pushed it open, and there he was. He stepped from the shadows like a vision conjured by her prayers. Shirtless, his bronzed chest gleaming faintly in the lantern glow, his long black hair falling over his shoulders. The tribal jewelry at his neck and arms caught the faint light, making him seem both man and legend. For a moment, Eliza froze, unable to breathe. She had told herself this hope was foolish, that he must surely be dead. Yet here he stood, as real as the beat of her own heart. "Takoda," she whispered, her voice breaking on his name. He crossed the barn in 2 strides, his hand brushing against hers, then cupping her face as though to prove she was not a ghost. His thumb traced the line of her cheek, and he exhaled sharply, the years of exile collapsing in that single breath. "You waited," he murmured. Though the question burned inside his tone, her eyes glistened. "I prayed. I begged God, but they told me you were dead." "Briggs," she choked on his name, anger and shame twisting in her voice. "He said you abandoned me, that you left everything behind. When the sheriff took the land, Briggs stepped in. And I had nowhere else to go." Takoda's jaw clenched. He had expected betrayal from Briggs, but hearing how his lies had poisoned Eliza's spirit lit a fire inside him. "You believed him?" he asked, not accusing, but aching. Her chin lifted, defiant even through her tears. "No, not in my heart. But what choice did I have? The town turned their backs. I would have starved if I fought him. And he watches me, Takoda, every step. He waits for me to falter." Takoda pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "You have not faltered. You are still standing. And now I am here." For a moment, silence wrapped them like a blanket, broken only by the restless shifting of cattle. Then Eliza's composure cracked, and she pressed her face against his chest. He held her, his hand stroking her hair, his other arm a shield around her trembling form. The years melted away, leaving only the truth that had bound them from the beginning: love, stubborn and unbroken. But danger lurked even in this fragile reunion. Outside, a dog barked near the house. Eliza stiffened. "Briggs keeps a pistol by his bed," she whispered urgently. "If he wakes," Takoda nodded, reluctantly loosening his embrace. "Not tonight, but soon. We will not hide forever." Before she could speak, he drew something from a pouch at his belt, a beaded necklace, worn but still intact. He lifted it over her head, letting it rest against her collarbone. "I carried this through the Badlands, through winters colder than death. Now it belongs to you again. A promise." Eliza touched the beads, her breath catching. "A promise of what?" "That you are not alone," he said, his voice low, fierce. "And that I will take back what is ours." Her eyes searched his, torn between fear and the fragile spark of hope that had returned. She wanted to believe him, she did believe him, but she knew the danger. Briggs was cruel, and the town was quick to side with power. "Takoda," she whispered, her hand tightening on his arm. "Don't let him kill you." He kissed her forehead, lingering just long enough to anchor her heart to his. Then, like a shadow, he slipped back into the night, leaving her with the necklace and the memory of his touch. As Eliza returned to the house, her steps lighter, Briggs stirred in his bed. His eyes opened briefly, suspicious, before closing again. But suspicion was enough. By dawn, the air around Dry Creek would be tighter, the watch on the ranch sharper. Takoda had made his move, and Briggs would soon sense the storm brewing just beyond his fences. The dawn broke with a pale golden light, spilling across the dry hills and the dusty streets of Red Hollow. Takoda stood at the edge of town, his figure tall and still, the early sun catching the lines of muscle carved from years of survival and war. He had slipped away from the barn before the first rooster crowed, leaving Eliza with only the warmth of his touch and the echo of his whispered promise. "I will not let them take you from me." Now, as the town stirred awake, Takoda knew that words alone would not be enough. The stares from the townsfolk were no longer the casual glances of curiosity. They were sharpened, suspicious. The sheriff had spoken of watching him, of keeping the Apache trouble at bay. Takoda understood men like that. They weren't seeking peace. They were waiting for an excuse to strike. Eliza, meanwhile, moved through her morning chores with trembling hands. She had tried to be steady, but her mother's eyes seemed to notice every falter. "You're pale, girl," her mother said, setting down a basket of eggs. "Have you been sneaking about again?" Eliza forced a smile, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to scream that she was tired of hiding, tired of being told who she could love. But she also knew the fury that would erupt if her secret were known. Her mother had already chosen a husband for her, a man with land, money, and no kindness in his eyes. The wedding had been set for 2 weeks' time. That night, Eliza slipped from her house once more, her steps light as a whisper on the dirt road. She carried a small bundle, bread, dried meat, and the blue ribbon she always wore in her hair. She wanted Takoda to have it, a piece of herself, something no one could take away. She found him near the river, crouched low, his reflection flickering on the water's surface. His long black hair fell loose down his back, catching the moonlight, his chest bare except for the tribal necklaces that clinked softly when he moved. When he saw her, his eyes softened, and the hardness he carried through the day melted away. "Eliza," he said. Rising to his full height, she pressed the bundle into his hands. "For you? I can't keep pretending, Takoda. My mother will marry me off before the next moon, and then I'll be locked away in a house with a man I despise." Her voice broke, and she grabbed his wrist. "Please, take me with you. I don't care if the whole town hunts us down." Takoda's jaw tightened, torn between desire and caution. He had known the path they walked was dangerous, but hearing her speak the words out loud made the truth burn brighter. If she fled with him, the town would cry out for blood. If she stayed, she would be lost to him forever. "Eliza," he said firmly, though his voice carried a tremor, "if you come with me, there will be no turning back. My people will not welcome you easily. Your people will call you traitor. Every sunrise will bring danger." She lifted her chin, tears glittering in her eyes but resolve hardening her voice. "I would rather live one day in freedom with you than a lifetime in a cage." Takoda's breath caught. For a moment, he could only stare at her, the courage in her face stirring something deeper than he had ever known. Slowly, he reached into his pouch and pulled out a carved talisman, etched from bone and polished smooth by time. He pressed it into her palm. "This was my brother's," he said quietly. "He gave it to me before he rode into battle and never returned. If you take this, you take my life as well." Eliza clutched it to her chest. "Then I'll carry your life with mine." The river's murmur filled the silence that followed. Above them, the stars burned bright, as though the heavens themselves bore witness to the promise they had sealed. But across the water, hidden in the brush, the sheriff's deputy crouched low, watching, listening. His eyes narrowed as he saw the two figures clasp hands, the pale girl and the proud Apache. He didn't move, didn't speak, only smirked as he realized what he had discovered. By morning, all of Red Hollow would know. The first shots cracked across the night like whips splitting the silence. Takoda threw Eliza to the ground, shielding her body with his own as bullets ripped through the barn door, sending splinters flying into the hay. Horses whinnied in terror, stamping and rattling their bridles as the air filled with gunpowder smoke. "Stay down," Takoda hissed, his long black hair brushing against her cheek as he rose to one knee, bow in hand. His eyes, burning with the sharp focus of a hunter, cut through the chaos. Eliza clutched at his wrist. "They'll kill you. He'll kill you." Takoda's gaze flicked toward the open barn door where shadows moved Elias and his hired guns, circling like wolves. His chest rose and fell, the turquoise beads of his necklace catching the dim lantern glow. "They've already tried," he murmured. "But I am not the one who will fall tonight." He moved with silent speed. An arrow knocked before Eliza could draw another breath. The string thrummed. A cry split the darkness outside as a man stumbled, clutching his shoulder. Gunfire followed, but Takoda had melted back into the barn's shadows, a ghost in his own land. Eliza scrambled after him, her heart hammering. "Takoda, please, we can run. There's still time if we take the river trail." Takoda shook his head. His hand brushed the barn wall where his carved symbol still gleamed in the faint light, the interlocked diamonds, their secret mark. "I will not run from what was stolen. Not my land. Not you." Another bullet whined through the barn, grazing a wooden beam. Takoda grabbed Eliza's hand and pulled her deeper inside. They ducked behind stacked hay bales, breaths ragged. Outside, the laughter of Elias rose cold, mocking. "Come out, redskin." Elias bellowed, his voice dripping venom. "You think you can sneak back and take what's mine? She's mine now. The land's mine. You'll leave here in the dirt where you belong." Eliza's face twisted with fury, tears shining in her eyes. She pressed close to Takoda, whispering so only he could hear. "It was never his. Never. I waited. I prayed you'd come back." Takoda reached up, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face with a tenderness that made the moment ache. "And I swore I would. Even if the desert swallowed me, I would return." The barn door groaned as Elias kicked it open. Lantern lights spilled across the floorboards, illuminating dust and hay. The long shadow of the man who had stolen everything stretched inside. Takoda's jaw tightened. He pressed Eliza back against the hay, rising slowly, every muscle taut, the tribal beads against his chest rattling softly. His silhouette filled the space, shirtless, powerful, a warrior unbroken. Elias stepped in, revolver raised, smirking beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Thought you'd stay dead." Takoda's eyes were dark as storm clouds. "And I thought you'd have learned honor." The two men stared across the dim barn, the air thick with dust, sweat, and the weight of everything stolen and broken. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She could feel it, the moment before lightning strikes, before the earth itself splits. Elias cocked the hammer back. "This land's mine now. She's mine. And you're nothing but a ghost." Takoda's hand flexed around the carved talisman he carried, its smooth wood pressing into his palm. "No," he said, his voice low, deadly calm. "I am the fire that ghosts fear." Before Elias could answer, Takoda moved fast as a striking hawk. He ducked low, sweeping a heavy wooden beam from the ground, and swung it with brutal force. The revolver fired, the shot exploding loud enough to shake the rafters. Eliza screamed, but when the smoke cleared, Elias staggered, his gun skittering across the floorboards. Takoda loomed above him, chest heaving, his muscles glistening with sweat, eyes blazing like embers. Outside, more footsteps thundered closer, Elias's men rushing to his aid. Eliza scrambled forward, clutching Takoda's arm. "There are too many, you can't fight them all." Takoda's eyes never left Elias, who groaned on the ground, clutching his ribs. "Then we'll fight until the earth itself remembers who this land belongs to." The barn shook with the sound of boots, shouts, and the metallic click of rifles. Eliza pressed against Takoda, her fear battling against the fierce hope burning in her chest. In that moment, surrounded, cornered Takoda looked down at her, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "This is where we begin to take it back." The barn doors burst wide as a dozen men stormed in, rifles raised and lanterns flaring. The golden light burned across the hay-strewn floor, illuminating Takoda, shirtless and unyielding, standing like an unbroken pillar before Eliza. His long black hair hung wild across his shoulders, his chest rising and falling with the steadiness of a man who had already faced death and returned. Elias staggered upright, spitting blood, rage twisting his face. "Don't just stand there, kill him," he roared. For a moment, the hired men hesitated. Takoda's presence, his sheer will, was like a storm pressing down on their lungs. His tribal jewelry glinted in the lamplight, each bead and bone a mark of a lineage they could not erase. His eyes, dark as obsidian, carried the weight of generations who had bled for that soil. Eliza clutched his arm, her voice trembling but firm. "You'll die if you stay. Please, Takoda, if you love me, run with me." But Takoda shook his head slowly. "If I run, he wins. And you are not his to claim." The first shot shattered the silence. Wood splintered beside Takoda's head. With a roar, he lunged, seizing a lantern from a beam and hurling it to the ground. Flames licked the hay, smoke coiling upward like angry spirits. The horses screamed, thrashing against their stalls. "Fire!" One man shouted, panic slicing through their courage. Takoda moved like a hawk in the chaos. He seized Elias, dragging him into the spreading flames, their shadows battling against the orange glow. Elias clawed and cursed, swinging wildly, but Takoda's strength was forged in exile, his fury sharpened by betrayal. He slammed Elias against a post, his hand closing around the man's throat. "You stole my land," Takoda growled, his voice low and steady even as the fire climbed higher. "You cast out the woman who was my heart, and you think you can own them both?" Elias's face twisted, eyes bulging. "She's mine. This whole place is mine." Takoda's grip tightened. "No, this land belongs to the ones who honor it, and she belongs to no man but her own heart." With a final surge, Takoda hurled him across the barn. Elias crashed into the dirt, gasping, his revolver skittering into the flames. Outside, the hired men wavered, watching the barn blaze. None dared step into the inferno to challenge the warrior who looked more spirit than man. Eliza rushed forward, coughing as smoke filled the air. "Takoda, we have to go, the roof's about to give." He seized her hand, their fingers interlocking like the carved symbol he had left behind. Together they darted toward the back, where the boards gave way to the night air. Bursting into the open, they staggered into the cool darkness, the barn blazing behind them like a pyre. Takoda stopped, turning back once. The fire lit his face, his hair a black river against the flames. "Let the land remember this night," he said. "Let it burn away his lies." Elias's men scattered, their courage gone with the blaze. The ranch house loomed in the distance, its windows glowing. Eliza gripped Takoda's arm, breathless. "What now?" "He'll come after us again." Takoda turned, pulling her close. For the first time, his expression softened, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. "Then we keep fighting. Not for vengeance for tomorrow. For the children who will know this land as it was meant to be." She leaned against him, her tears dampening his skin. "I thought I'd lost you forever." "You never lost me," he murmured. "I was always walking back to you." Behind them, the barn collapsed in a thunder of sparks and smoke, the flames painting the night sky. The sound echoed across the valley like a drumbeat, an ending and a beginning all at once. Takoda lifted his gaze to the stars above, their cold fire steady beyond the smoke. He tightened his grip on Eliza's hand. "This is our land," he whispered, "and no man will steal it again." As dawn's first light touched the horizon, they walked away from the ashes together, warrior and woman, bound by fire, loss, and love, stepping into a future carved from the flames of the past.